करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि सर्वं ब्रह्म उपनिषदम् माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्याम् मा ब्रह्म निराकरोत्। अनिराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मे अस्तु। तदात्मनि निरते यौपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ॐ इत्येतदक्षरमुद्गीतमुपासीत ॐ इति ह्युद्गायते तस्योपव्याख्यानम् तेषां खल्वेषां भूतानां त्रीण्येव बीजानि भवन्ति आण्डजं जीवजम् उद्भिज्यमिति। तेषां जीवाविष्टानां of those who possess the jivatvam or the life, the sentient beings, the living beings of those living beings, pakshadinam such as birds, snakes and others, bhutanam. So by the word bhuta, Bhashyakara interprets as the living beings rather than those three elements. The reason, Eshamiti Pratyaksha Nirdeshat, because Upanishad says Esham Bhutanam, of these Bhutas beings, the beings who are evident. But Tejah Prabhutinam Tesham Trivutkaranasya Vakshamanatvat Asati Trivutkarane Pratyaksha Nirdesha Anupattihi. There is those three elements. The fire, water and earth have not yet undergone the process of the threefold combination, and therefore they are not yet in the gross form, imperceptible form, tangible form. Therefore, those three elements could not have been referred to by the pronoun Esham. Devata Shabda Prayogacha Tejah Prabhutishu Imaha Tisraha Devataha iti. Also, the Upanishad uses the word Devata for these three Devatas, for these three elements. Imaha tisro Devataha anena jivena atmana anupravishya. That I will enter these three elements as the very Atma, as a Jivatma. So those three elements there in the next passage itself are referred to as Devatas. And Paroksha Priyaya Vahi Devaha, the Devatas always prefer to be referred to indirectly and not directly. Tasmat Tesham Bhutanam Pakshi Pashu Sthavarādīnām. So by the Bhutanams, by the beings, we should understand the Pakshi, the bird, Pashu, the animals, Sthavara, the trees, etc. Trini eva. Eva means what? Na atiriktani. Only three. That means no other than three. What is bijani? Means karanani bhavanti. Bijani, karanani. Meaning that the sentient beings or living beings whom we see in this universe have only three sources. Not more than three sources. Kani tani iti. What are those three causes or three sources? Iti uchyante. Then these are the things. Andajam, andajatam, andajam, andajameva, andajam, pakshyadi. First category is those who are born of andaja, those who are born of birds, etc. What is andajam? Andajam eva andajam. So andajatam, andajam. That which is born of anda or the egg is called andajam. And andajam itself is andajam. Those which are born of eggs, such as birds, snakes, etc. So why do you say that the birds are the source of birds and not eggs? Because birds are seen to be born of eggs. Pakshi sarpadibhyo hi pakshi sarpadeo jayamana dushyante. From the eggs you cannot make out what will be born, because sometimes eggs look alike and therefore you cannot determine which creature will be born. But from the snake you know for sure that another snake will be born. From the bird you know that another bird will be born. Tena pakshi pakshinam bijam sarpa sarpanam. So from that we conclude that it's a bird which is a source of another bird, a snake that is a source of another snake, and not the eggs. Tatha anyadapi andajatam tajjatiyanam bijamityartha. So alligator, etc. So anyadapi andajatam, whatever it is that is born of eggs, is tajjatiyanam bijam, is a bija, the cause of the members of the same species. Nanu andajatam andajam uchyate. Question is raised. Andat jatam andajam. That which is born of anda or egg is called andajam. Ataha andameva bijamiti yuktam katham andajam bijam uchyate. So when you use the expression andajam, andat jatam andajam, that which is born of egg is called andajam. So therefore it is born of eggs, and therefore egg must be so called the cause or the source of this bird, etc. Why do you say bird is the source of bird? Satyam evam syad yadi tvad-ichchatantra shruti syat. This would have been so if the Shruti followed your desires, your expectations. Swatantra tu Shruti. The Shruti is Swatantra, not following somebody's expectations or somebody's line of thinking. It is independent pramanam. Meaning Shruti is not pramanam because it follows your logic. Shruti is pramanam or valid means of knowledge on its own. And your logic has to follow the Shruti and not the other way around. So when Vashyakara says that what you say would have been true if Shruti followed your thinking, meaning that if Shruti were not independent pramanam, and if reasoning were the pramanam, then you would have been right. But that's not so. Shruti is the pramanam on her own. Yatah aha andajadeva bijam na andaditi. Therefore it is said that birds are the source of birds and not the eggs, because it is independent means of knowledge. Drishyate cha andajadi abhave tajjate santati abhavah na andadi abhave. We find that the birds, when the birds are not there, other birds are not born. It is the presence of birds that brings about the birth of other birds. If birds are not there, like some extinct species, then those birds are seen not to be born. So it's Anvaya and Vyatireka. By that, it is clear that so not only Shruti is Pramanam, there is a reasoning also to support what the Shruti says. Ataha andajadini eva bijani andajadinam. Therefore, we have to accept that for birds alone or those who are born from eggs, then those creatures themselves are the source of the subsequent progeny. तथा जीवाजातम जीवजम jarayajamiti purusha pashvadi. And so also second category of the living beings are those which are born of the womb. So thus the living beings here are classified based on how they are born. That is one way of classification. So andajam, jarayujam, born of the womb. Manushya Pashvadi, the human beings, animals, etc., are all born of wombs. They are called Jivajam or Jarayujam, also another expression. Third category is Udbhijam, Udbhinati, the Udbhit. So that which penetrates upward is called Udbhit. Udbhit. Bhit means to penetrate, Ud means upward. So that which penetrates upward is called Udbhit. What is Sthavaram? The motionless creatures, motionless living beings such as trees. Tato jatam udbhijyam. So Udbhit is interpreted as tree. And udbhitah jatam udbhijyam. So that which is born of Udbhit is called Udbhijyam. Dhanava udbhita, or the seeds, also corn or seeds also can be called udbhit because tato jayate iti udbhijyam. Whatever is born of the seeds also can be called udbhijyam. Sthavar bijam, stavaranam bijam ityartha. Svedaja संशोक जयोः अंडजोः अंडज उद्भिज्जयोः एव यथा संभवम् अंतर्भावः. So we find that one set of creatures are not yet accounted for. Svedajam, those which are born of perspiration. And this is another one here. Samshokajam. So those who are born of heat. So andaja udbhijyayoho eva yathasambhavam antarbhava. And so Anandagiri was trying to account for this. Svedam udbhidya jayamanam damsamashakade. Svedam udbhidya jayamanam. So that is born penetrating the perspiration or the sweat. It's called svedayam. That can be included in the udbhijyam. Damsamashakade, like a gadfly, like a mosquito. They are born of Sweda? I don't know. Anyway. Samshokad aushnya ja. Samshoka means aushnya, meaning warmth. Tasmad jayamanam yukadi. So yukadi is like lice, etc. That is said to be samshokajam. That andaje antarbhavate. That can be included in andajam. Yadva or svedajam yukadi, or you can say lice, etc. are born of sweda or perspiration. Tad andaje antarbhutam. That can include in the andajam. Samshokad aushnad bhumim udbhidya jatam mashakadi. So apparently mosquitoes or some creatures, insects, they emerge from the earth. So all of them can include into udbhijyam. Tatha cha na tayosti pruthak vyutpadana apeksha. Therefore, there is no need to mention them separately. There are only 3 categories, not even 4, according to this Upanishad. Svedajade andajadau antarbhavasya prapakam aha. What makes you do this? What makes you include Svedaja and Samshokada into other categories? And thus you 3 categories and not 4 or 5? Because Vasaka evam hi avadharanam trini eva bijaneti upapannam bhavati. The evakara, 3 only, that would become logical only when others are included in these 3. The next passage. Seyam devata aikshata hanta am imastisro devataha anena jivena atmana anupravishya nam rupe vyakarvani te. Sayam devata, sa prakrita sadakhya devata. This devata that is under discussion, that is Sat or existence or Brahman, which is Tejobanna Yonihi, which is described as the cause of the 3 elements, fire, water and earth. Ukta devata ukta aikshata ikshitavati yatha purvam bahusyamiti. Yatha bahusyamiti purvam ikshitavati. Earlier, the same devata also had deliberated, may I become many. Tatha, in a similar manner. Kimiti punah aikshata prayojana abhavad. So what is the need for this Devata to again deliberate or see? What's the purpose to be served? So Vashyakara said, Tadev bahubhavanam prayojanam nadyapi nirvrittamiti. Still, that sankalpa bahusyam may become many. That bahubhavanam of becoming many, that process is not yet concluded. Ata iksham punah krutavati bahubhavanam eva prayojanam uradikritya. So the ikshanam is different. The manner of ikshanam, the deliberation, seeing is different from earlier. Formerly ikshanam was bahusyam prajaya. Now it is ane itaha imaha tisro devataha, etc. So the ikshanam meaning seeing is of different nature. But the purpose of entering these three, the idea is the Sat or existence or Brahman enters these three elements. Something similar to Taittiriya Upanishad where it said, Trasustva Tadeva Anupraveshate. Having created the universe of names and forms, Ishvara entered into them. It is said, having created the three elements, then Ishvara enters into them to again multiply. But Bahubhavanameva Prayojanam Urarikritya. Keeping in mind the purpose of becoming many alone, this Ikshanam also is there. Katham, what's the nature of the Ikshanam? Hanta idanim aham imaha yathoktaha tej adyaha tisro devataha. Okay, we will begin from here, I think. Alright, so on the page 235. So as Abhinava Naranandendra Saraswati said, Ikshanam cha Mayavrityavachinnam Chaitanyamiti bhavaha. Ikshanam is a Mayavritti. Where Mayavritti is there, there is a reflection of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness, Mayavritti with reflected consciousness is called Ikshanam, seeing. So Vashyakara says, Hanta idanim aham imaha yathoktaha tej adyaha tisro devataha anena jivena iti sabuddhistham purvasrushti अनुभूत प्राणधारणम आत्मानमेव स्मरन्ति आह अनेन जीवेन आत्मना इति. Hanta is translated let it be, may it be. Idanim now, or Hanta can be Idanim. Aham imaha yathoktaha tej adyaha tisro devataha. These three devatas, tej adi, beginning from fire. Anena jivena atmana anupravish. As jivatma, I will enter them. Will enter these three elements as their Atma, as Jivatma, Jivena Atmana. So the question was asked here, says Saraswati ji, Praveshat Purvam Jiv Rupa Bhavena अनेनेति बुद्धिस्थवाची idam shabda ayogam iti ashankyaha. So, imaha tisro devataha anena jivena atmana. Anena again is the third case of the word idam. So, praveshat purvam jiva rupa bhavena. This jiva will be there only when Paramatma has entered the three elements. Having created name and form, then you enter, that is when the jivatma is. Until then there is no jivatma. So here I will enter as jivatma. But where is jivatma? How did the Devata say as jivatma I will enter the three elements? Because there is no jivatma as yet. So Bhashyakara is Swabuddhistam Purva Sushti Anubhuta Pranadharanam Atmanameva Smaranti. In the previous cycle of creation, Swabuddhistam, at that time, Purva Sushti Anubhuta Pranadharanam Atmanameva Smaranti. This Devata recollects what was the situation in the previous cycle of creation. Whether Devata was as Pranadharaka, as Jivatma, that Devata remembers its role as Jivatma. Who is Jivatma? Pranadharaka. One that sustains the life is called Jiva. So life is sustained only when this body etc. is there, then alone the life is sustained. So the one, and also the life is sustained as long as the reflected consciousness is there. When the reflected consciousness is not there, the prana is no more there. So prana, the life force, is sustained here as long as the reflected consciousness is. So this is what happened in the previous cycle of creation. Having created three elements, then this Sat Devata, the deity called Sat or existence, had entered those three and become the Jiva, sort of. So that Anena Jivena. Anena means this Jiva. Where is that? Again, Anena is a pronoun which refers to something which is evident. It is not evident to us, it is Buddhism. But sometimes what is evident to you in your own mind also, you refer to as evident. So Buddhistam Purva Sushti Anubhuta Pranadharanam Atmanam remembers its own self as sustaining the prana as Jivatma. So remembers that this is what was the previous cycle, same should be done in this cycle also. Aha anena jivena atmana iti. As Jivatma, I will enter these three elements. Jiva Shabda Samaha Prana iti. So Pranadharanam, Purus Anubhuta Pranadharanam. Jiva Pranadharaneti Abhiyuktokte Ityartha. Because Panini's Dhatu Pata says Jiva Pranadharane, the pronoun, the verb Jiva, Jiva in the sense of Pranadharana, sustaining prana. Somebody gives some other meaning also. Anena jivayati iti jivaha. Jivayati, that which prompts. So it is, life is called jivatma. Iti vyutpatya antaryami abhidhiyate. So Vaishnava says that what is referred to by here jivatma is not this jiva, antaryami. Iti nirastam. So that is dismissed here. Rudehe yoga apaharitvaditi. By the word jiva, the rudi is the pranadharaka. So to discard the rudhi or the prachalita meaning or the commonly understood meaning, to discard that and take in its place, that meaning must have a strong reason. But otherwise, the rudhi or the commonly accepted meaning always has a first preference. तस्मिन् आत्मशब्द प्रयोगस्य तात्पर्यमाह अनेन इत्यादिना अनेन जीवेन आत्मना इति. So for that jiva, the word atma is used. Jiva is referred to as its own self. So in the previous cycle also, the consciousness after entering these three elements had become as though jivatma. So jivena atma as jivatma. Gruhita padadvayartham anuvadati jivena atmana. These are the two words. So the Bhashyakara reiterates the two and says प्राणधारण कर्ता आत्मना इति वचनात् स्वात्मनः अव्यतिरिक्तेन चैतन्य स्वरूपतया अविशिष्टेन इत्येतद् दर्शयति. So jivena is interpreted as pranadharana kartra. So jiv pranadharane, the one that sustains the life as jiva. Atmanayati, as my own self. As my own self I will enter. Iti vachanat svatmana avyatiriktena. So the devata is entering as its own self. So what is the self? Chaitanya swarupataya. As the very consciousness it enters. Anena jivena atmana anupravishya. That anupravesha belongs to the devata, the deity. Then jivena vyakarvana. The vyakarvana belongs to jiva. That will be said later on. Anena jivena atmana namarupe vyakarvani iti. So anena jivena nam rupe vyakarvani atmana anupravishya. Because atmana anupravishya, as my own consciousness self, my own self that is consciousness, I will enter. So entry is on the part of the consciousness. Once the consciousness enters, becomes identified with this name and form, becomes jiva. So subsequent vyakaranam, the manifestation of names and forms, is subsequently done by jiva. That is the arrangement here. Swatmanah avyatiriktena chaitanya swarupataya avishishtena ityetad darshayati. So by the use of the word atma, atmana, we understand that as atma, as the very self is entered, as consciousness. Chaitanya Swarupataya is not something or someone different from its own self, as the very consciousness. Avishishtena iti etad darshayati. Avishishtena. Still the consciousness is unqualified. As unqualified consciousness, the entry is on the part of the unqualified consciousness. Says the Tika, avyatiriktena etad darshayati iti anvayah. So atmana avyatiriktena darshayati shows that the deity has entered as its own self, which is consciousness or Chaitanya. Avyatiriktva hetumaha chaitanya swarupataya avishishtena. See, yes, consciousness is unqualified. Chaitanyam is unqualified consciousness. Therefore, avishishtena, avilakshanena, that's also another meaning here given, that not different from consciousness, the same consciousness, having same lakshana, same characteristics as asti bhati priyam. If you look at Anandagiri, idanim hanta idanim mahabhuta sushte anantaram, now, then, which means what? After the creation of the five elements, the three elements. Brahmana mayopadikasya karanatvat mayopadivashat purusustau anubhutatvam tassamskarasya buddhistatvam smaranam cha ityadi na viruddham iti drashtavyam. How can Brahman have samskara? Brahman is nirvishesha. How can it have samskara? So says here, Brahmana mayopadikasya karanatvat. In primary sense, mayopadikam Brahman. Brahman with the upadhi of Maya, what we call Saguna Brahma, is the cause of creation in the primary sense. Therefore, Purusustau Anubhutatvam. Therefore, it is tenable or conceivable that Brahman, the Saguna Brahma, remember what was there in the previous cycle of creation. Samasti vyashtatmasu dehesu pravishya. Now, bhutatat samskarasya buddhistatvam smaranam cha ityadi na viruddham. So what was experienced in the previous cycle of creation is there in the samskara as a seed form, and so that becomes a memory. Memory is always for what is experienced previously. So previous experiences leave their impressions in the mind, and those impressions then become the memory. Again says Anandagiri, Nirvikalpaka Chinmata Rupa Devata Mayavashat Mahabhutani Srishtva. Chinmatra, the Devata, the deity who is pure consciousness, Nirvikalpa, without the Vikalpa, with subject-object duality, it is non-dual. The deity of the nature of consciousness, that is non-dual. Mayavashat Mahabhutani Srishtva Prakritim Swam Avashtabhya Visrujami Punah Punah. Bringing the Prakriti under my control, I create again and again different cycles of creation, one after the other. Mayavashat Mahabhutani Srishtva Teshu Yada Pravishta Tada Arabdeshu Sutra Virat Prabhuseshu Samasti Vishyatma Deheshu Pravishya Tattad Deha Vimanavati Devdattadi Namna Rupena Shaukladana Sanyojya Pindam Vyakaroti. So, Devata, there is consciousness which is nirvikalpa or non-dual. Mayavashat Mahabhutani Srishtva. With the help of Maya, this Devata or Param Brahma created the Mahabhutani Srishtva, the elements, three elements here, the fire, water and earth. Tishveda Pravishta. And then when the Devata entered those three elements, Tada Tad Arabdeshu Sutra Virat Prahruteshu Samasti Veshtatmashu Dehesu Pravishya. Which Deha did the Paramatma enter? Both Vyashti as well as Samashti. Meaning that when it enlivens one Deha, all the Dehas are enlivened together. That is Virat. When one subtle body is enlivened, all subtle bodies are enlivened, that is Hiranyagarbha. Tada tad arabdeshu sutra virat pravrutishu. Call it sutra or samasti sukshma sharira abhimani chaitanyam, then virat samasti sthul abhimani chaitanyam. समष्टि व्यष्टात्मसु देहेषु प्रविश्य तत्तद्देहाभिमानवती देवदत्तादि नाम्ना रूपेण च श्लौक्ल्यादिना संयोज्य पिंडम व्याकरोति. So that devata, when it entered, tada tad arabdeshu, so mayavasat mahabhutani srishtva teshu yada pravishta, having created the Maha elements, then when she entered, tada tad arabdeshu sutra virat pravrutishu samasti vyashtyatmasu deheshu pravishya. So when it entered one body, entered all the body. Enlivened one subtle body, enlivened all subtle bodies. So samasti vyashtyatmasu. So there is Vyashti of the individual entity. Samasti also is looked upon as a living organism. The universe also is looked upon as a living organism. And just as this organism has this jiva as pranadharaka, as sustaining life, so also imagine that the cosmic prana is what sustains the life for this samasti or totality. तत्तद्देहाभिमानवती देवदत्तादिनाम्ना रूपेण च शौक्ल्यादिना संयोज्य. So she entered this Virat Sutra Samasti Vyashti Tattaddehaabhimanavati. What is entry? Identification with those particular dehas of the bodies. Devadattadi namna. It assumed the name such as Devadatta, Rupena, Shaukladina, such as white or fair. Sanyojya Pindam Vyakaroti. And so, uniting them with the name and form, this Pinda is brought to manifestation. Anupravishya. So, Bhashyakara says, और सर्वगतस्य आत्मनः सर्पादीनां बिलादिष्वेव मुख्य प्रवेशो न संभवति. Do you mean to say that this Paramatma entered these bodies like a snake enters its own bila, its own, what do you call it, all hole, all right. So, similarly, does it enter like this here? Pravesho, mukhya pravesho na sambhavati. This pravesha or entry, which is normally understood that way, is not possible. Iti ashankya teja iti. So Bhashyakara says further, anupravishya tejo banna bhutamatra samsargena लब्ध विशेष विज्ञाना सती नाम च रूपम च नाम रूपे व्याकरवाणे विस्पष्टम आकरवाणे असौ नामायम इदं रूपः इति व्याकुर्यामित्यर्थः. So Bhashyakara explains what is anupravishya. Having entered means what? Tejobanna bhuta matra samsargena. Entry is merely samsarga, association with these three elements, the fire, water and earth. Just association. What is association? Bhashyakara will explain. Getting reflected in them. Who is Jiva? Bhashyakara explains. Brahma Pratibimbam. So Jivanamakam Brahma Pratibimbam Asti. Who is Jiva? The Pratibimba, the reflection of Brahma. Reflection where? Reflection in these three elements and subsequent bodies. So that is called the Matra Samsarga. Samsarga or association or contact is not in a primary sense, but just as the sun comes in contact with water and enters as a reflection, or the face comes in contact with a mirror and enters as a reflection. Since it is the nature of mirror to reflect whatever lighted object is there in front of it, it's the nature of water also to reflect whatever lighted object is there. Similarly, it is the nature of these three elements, subtle body you can say, the elements are in their subtle state and so subtle bodies are formed. It is their nature to reflect consciousness. So wherever they are, consciousness gets reflected anyway. No separate effort is to be made. So tejobanna bhuta matra samsargena labda vishesha vijnana sati. So right now it was merely unqualified consciousness. Now it becomes qualified. So far it had no name and form. Now it becomes qualified consciousness. Labda vishesha vijnana sati. It is not vishesha vijnanam. Formerly asti bhati priyam. This unqualified vijnanam was there now. Nama cha rupam cha nam rupe vyakarvani. Entering means what? I will become possessed of qualified knowledge. So far my knowledge is I am consciousness. Now I will become Devadatta, Yajnadatta, Vishnumitra, Vishesha Vijnana Sati. What is Vyakarvani? Vi akru Vyakru. Vi Vispashtam Akarvani. Vispash very clearly manifest the names and forms. Asau namayam idam rupaiti. So says the Tika, Bhutatraya karye vishesha vijnana lava pravesha iti bhavaha. So far the knowledge of consciousness was I am consciousness. But now it says I am the three elements, the vishesha vijnana. And Devadatta, etc., name and form, I am the name and form, I am Devadatta, I am Yajnadatta, I am Vishnumitra. So Bhutatraya Karya. From the three elements are born the Vyashti and Samashti Upapinda. That's a Bhutatraya Karyam, the product of these three elements. Vishesha Vijnana Labha, identification with them. Sarvani Rupani Vichitya Dhiraha Namani Krutva Abhivadan Yadaste. So Dhiraha Sarvani Rupani Vichitya, having created all the Rupa, it assumes the Nama names. So that is called Pravesha. Not Pravesha of a snake entering its hole. It is the Pravesha of sun entering the water as a reflection. Vyakarana prakara pratipadikam काण्वश्रुतिं पठति असौ नामायम् इदं रूपयति तद्भेदं तर्हि अव्याकृतमासीत् तदात्मानमेव व्याक्रियत असौ नामायम् idam rupayati. So Bhashyakara here refers to that Shruti, Kanma Shruti, Brihadaranyaka. Asau namayam idam rupayati patha sadhuhu shruto tatha patha darshanaditi. But we have the same patha here anyway. Maybe this Tikakara had a different patha, and so he says that this patha is preferable. Now continue Anagya Devatayaha Sarvajñatvat Asamsaritvat Swatantracha Sankalpa Praveshau Ayukta Vidi Shankate. Devata, that is Sadakya Devata. Sarvajñatvat, because of Maya, it's all knowing. Asamsaritvat, it is beyond the samsara, so it is asamsari, transcending samsara, untouched by samsara. Swatantracha, even if you are asamsari, but if you are partantra, then you might wind up doing something which may be harmful to you. The question here is, how come this deity, that is Brahman, did something which is harmful to its very self? How come it entered this body? How come it identified with that? And now it is suffering. So, you may suffer if you are thrown into prison. Because you are aswatantra, you are paratantra, you are dependent. But if you have the freedom, you won't enter the prison. Why did the deity do that? And so, Sankalpa Praveshu Ayuktau, to say that I will enter this as Jivatma and then manifest the name and form, seems to be Ayuktam, improper, not logical. Iti Shankate Nanu iti. Or Jivapadena Nirasya Shankam Aha. So the word Jiva is used, and that is meant to dispel a certain doubt. What is that? Bhashyakara represents as Nanu iti. Nanu na yuktam idam asamsarinyaha sarvajñayaha devatayaha buddhipurvakam aneka shatasahasra anarthashrayam deham anupravishya dukkham anubhavishyami iti sankalpanam anupraveshascha swatantre sati. Swatantre sati should be brought first. Swatantre sati, na yuktam. Inasmuch as this deity, which is Sadakya or Param Brahma, is independent. Therefore, na yuktam, it doesn't appear to be proper. Asamsaranyayaha sarvajñayaha devatayaha. Devata is sarvajña because it knows what the previous creation was, it knows what this creation is going to be. So, Ghatakarta, Ghatagnya, the creator of a part must have the knowledge of part. Similarly, creator of the entire universe also must have the knowledge of the universe. Therefore, the deity must be Sarvajña, all-knowing. See, if you do not know, then also you can enter a trap. Even though you may be Swatantra and a thinking person, so you do not know that there are minefields. You step over a mine and it blows up, it can happen. But here, Sarvajñaya, it knows everything. Past, present and future. Everything this deity knows. Asamsarinyaha. You may be Sarvajña, but you still may be a samsari. When identify this body, Therefore, you are controlled by your own desires or ragadveshas. There may or may not be external control, there may be internal control. That's why there are many dictators who are otherwise so-called independent, but they take miserable decisions, do miserable things because controlled by their inner passions. That also is not the case here. And suppose you did something in sleep or when you are not quite awake, under influence of drugs, influence of sleep, etc., it's possible that even a well-intentioned person and who is all-knowing or who is a knowledgeable person can also do something which is harmful to itself. Possible. Person may do something harmful to himself, but buddhipurvakam, this decision is buddhipurvakam. It is a deliberate, intelligent decision, not decision under influence of something. All of this is important in a court of law, whether the person knew or not, was it done intentionally or not, whether was it free to do or not. In the court, if it can be proven that this homicide or murder was committed not with a free mind but under influence of something, somebody pressurized him to do, he was under influence of drugs, or he was not in his right mind, all of these defense can be, but none of that can apply to Devata here. So what did it decide and what did it do? Aneka shata sahasra anarthashrayam devam anupravishya, that I will enter this body which is ashrayam, the abode of hundreds of thousands of calamities, hundreds of thousands of sufferings and pains. This is the abode. I will enter the body such as that. Meaning that you are entering fire deliberately, or entering a prison cell where you know it is a miserable existence. Dukkham anubhavishyami iti. Entering this, then I will suffer the pain. Because it must know. Deity being Sarvajna would know the consequences of entering. If you don't know the consequences, it is possible that you may enter a place and then later on discover that it was a wrong thing to do, but this deity knows. How come it entered this body, which is abode of hundreds of thousands of suffering and pain, and then he enters and says, now I will suffer pain. What kind of a decision is it? What kind of sankalpa is that? What kind of entry is this? It is sankalpanam anupraveshasya. So this kind of sankalpa is there. I will enter and suffer, and then enters anupraveshasya svatante sati nayuktam. So because the deity is swatantra, sarvajnyaha, asamsarinyaha, sarvajnyaha, devatayaha, buddhipurvakam, it doesn't make sense. So says Anandagiri, kim sakshat anupraveshade viruddhyate, kim va jivadvara piti vikalpya adyamangi karoti. If the deity enters as itself and then suffers in the primary sense, then what you say is right. But if it enters as jiva, then what the Shruti says is tenable. So therefore here the vikalpas are presented here. Kim sakshat anupravesha, entering directly as the deity is, or kim va jivadvara, or becoming jiva and then entering. Entering as Paramatma is one thing, or becoming jiva and entering is another thing. Which one you are objecting to? If you are objecting to this position that How can Paramatma enter? You are right, that is accepted, cannot enter. But as Jivatma, it enters. Satyamiti. Or if you look at the Tika below, Bhrantya Sankalpa Pravesho Ghatete, somebody may say that, we already discussed that. By Bhranti and delusion, somebody can think like this and do it. Says no, Sarvajnaya, deity is all knowing. So Swatantre Sati Sankalpanam Anupraveshasya Ayuktameti Purvena Anvaya. Okay. जीव रूपेण संकल्प अनुप्रवेशयोः वस्तु स्वरूप अस्पर्शित्वात्. If as Jivatma it enters, then it does not in any way affect the consciousness. The idea is that जीव रूपेण संकल्प अनुप्रवेशयोः वस्तु स्वरूप अस्पर्शित्वात्. As a jiva, one can do this because not sarvajna, samsare. And then Sankalpa Pravesha, all of this is possible. Na Sarvajñatvadi Virodh. So deity can be Sarvajña, but as Jiva it can be Alpajña. Na Virodhaiti Shrautena Jiva Padena Parihati Satyam Evam iti. Bhashyakara says Satyam Evam Na Yuktam Syat Yadi Svenaiva अभिकृतेन रूपेण अनुप्रविशेयं दुःखम् अनुभवेयम् इति च संकल्पितवती. सत्यम एवं न युक्तम स्यात्. What you say is right and this would not be proper. यदि स्वेनैव अभिकृतेन रूपेण. So without changing, if deity entered as Paramatma and then suffers, then it would not be proper. Svenima avikrutena rupena anupraveshayam. I will enter without changing as my true nature of consciousness, dukkham anubhavayam, and then I will suffer pain. But enter is one, suffering pain is another one. Entry is on the part of the Paramatma, suffering on the part of Jivatma. So therefore, it is quite okay. It is Sankalpavati. If this is what the case, then what you say is right. But natu evam. But that is not the case. Katham tarhi anena jivena atmana anupravishya iti vachanat. So even, but that's not the case. Katham te, then what's the case? Ayana jivena atmana anupravishya iti vachanat. As jivatma, I will enter. So by those words, it is jiva who is suffering and not Paramatma. As though suffering, of course, but still. Says Anandagiri, Sakshat Anupraveshadi Nasti Chetari Katham Tat Iti Akanksha Purukam Dvitiyam Dushayati. If Sakshat Anupravesha is not there, then what? In what way is it there? So Dvitiyam Jiva Rupena. Devatayaha Jivadvarena Anupraveshadi Aviruddhamiti Sheshaha. So iti vachanat. So anena jivena atmana anupravishayati vachanat devatayaha jivadvarena anupraveshadi aviruddham. So by the verse, as jivatma will enter, then the devatas entering as jiva is quite okay, is all explainable. Or says the Narayanandendra, Vachanadi Anantaram Jaivena Rupena Sankalpitavati iti Adhyahritya Vakyam Purayanam. So Jaivena Rupena Sankalpitavati. So this Sankalpa is as a Jiva Rupa, not as Paramatma. Iti. Says the Tika, Nanu jivasyapi sat abhinnatve javapi rupam sadvastu samsparsheti sadosha tadavastha iti. But are you trying to say that the jiva is different from Paramatma? You say that as Paramatma is not entered, as Jivatma, the deity, entered, do you mean to say that jiva is different from Paramatma? Nanu jivasyapi sat abhinnatve. Jiva also is not separate from Sat. Therefore, Sadvastu samsparshi. So therefore, whatever happens to Jiva will also happen to Paramatma. It is like this, like an actor entering a costume. Bhikhari. If you slap the bhikhari, if you slap the beggar, the actor will be slapped. Is it not so? The beggar is not separate from actor. So whatever happens, therefore, beggar touches the actor. So whatever happens to beggar will happen to actor. Is it not so? Iti ashankya tasya pratibimbatmakatvat pratibimagatasya vagratadehe bimbasvarupa samsveshatva abhavat. Says here it is, entering is like the sun entering the water as reflection. Then reflection may look distorted, reflection may look dull, reflection may look wavy, but all of that do not affect the sun. Bimba swarupa asamsparshitva, varusamsparshitva abhavat. So vakrata, the distortion of the reflection, do not in any way affect the bimba or the image. Therefore, na dosha iti jivo hi nama iti. So let's read the next sentence. Jivo hi nama devatayaha abhasamatram chidabhasa. What is jiva? Devatayaha abhasamatram. What is called jiva is the abhasa or the reflection of devata, of sat, of Satchidananda. What is abhasa? See, Anandagiri says, abhimukhyena ahamiti aparokshena bhasate iti abhasa. Abhasa. Abhimukhyena bhasate. What is abhimukhyena? Ahamiti aparokshena. Ahamiti aparokshataya bhasate. Therefore, the devata, the consciousness, enters as I. The I also is aparoksha, also is immediate. Ahankara. As ahankara, the devata enters. So ahankara is the reflection of the consciousness. Swatah aparoksha chit pratibimba itself is the reflection of the consciousness. Tanmatram jiva nama ityartha. So who is jiva? Nothing but the reflected consciousness. Tasya swarupena anaditvepi vishishtarupena saditvam darshayati. As consciousness, jiva has no beginning, but as jiva, it has a beginning. When the entry takes place, then the jiva is born. Until then, it is not there. Saditvam. So Bhashyakara says, Buddhyade bhutamatra samsarga janitaha adarsha pravishtaha purusha pratibimbaha jaladishu iva cha suryadinam. Buddhyadibhuta matra samsarga janitam. Buddhyadi bhuta matra. This bhuta, the three elements, the fire, water and earth, they result into this buddhi, etc. as a subtle body, buddhi. So buddhyadi bhuta matra samsarga. Bhuta matra is the subtle form of these three elements, So, Bhutamatra. Therefore, the subtle three elements have resulted into Buddhi, etc., as subtle body, and that is where the deity gets reflected. So, Bhutamatra samsarga janita hai, association with the Buddhi, etc., which are the products of the three subtle elements in their pure state. What samsarga is there? What association is there? What contact is there? Adarsheya pravishtaha purusha pratibimbaha. Just as the reflection of the face as though entered the mirror. Jaladushyevacha suryadinam, like the sun, etc., could be moon also, have entered the water. In that manner is the samsarga, the association of the consciousness with buddhi, with the three matras. So with the three elements we should understand the subtle body, and that's where the reflection of consciousness is. Sri Anandagiri, buddhyadibihi bhutamatradivischa. Both ways it says, buddhyadibihi bhutamatradivischa, with buddhi, etc., and with the three elements also. Chidatmana samsarga tena janita. Buddhyadi bhutamatra samsarga janita. Explained as buddhyadi cha bhutamatra with buddhi as well as bhutamatra, the consciousness as samsarga, meaning the reflection, tena janita. So because of that association or contact, the reflection that is born is called jivatma. Or look at the Narayana Nanendra. Buddhyadirupam yad bhutamatra bhutakaryam. Seems to be more appropriate. Buddhyadirupam, buddhi, etc., the subtle body, yat bhutamatra bhutakaryam. Bhutamatra bhuta. So, karyam, the product of the three subtle elements. Tat samsarganitam abhasamatram. Samsarganitam abhasamatram, being reflected in there, pratibimba ityartha. Asambandinyaha devatayaha katham buddhyadi samsarga heti. Hey, but consciousness cannot have contact with anything. Asango yayam purusha. Just a space has no contact with this pot, for example. Because the pot can be touched. Pot is qualified by the property of being the touch, but space cannot be touched. So space cannot have any contact with this pot. So consciousness that even subtler than their space, how can it have any contact with buddhi, etc., which are murta? Murta means formed, and that is formless, partless, cannot have any contact. So asambandinyaha devatayaha. The devata cannot be sambandini, meaning cannot have any physical or a real contact. Katham buddhyadi samsarga iti. What sort of samsarga the contact is with the buddhi and others? Iti ashankya ati vyavahitanam asambandhanam suryadinam jaladi sambandhavata. Like the sun that has no physical contact with water at all, but still gets reflected in water. So that's the sambandha or the relationship that the sun has with water. Tadvat pratifalan hetu bhuta kaschana sambandha asti. Similarly, some kind of a contact of being reflected in the subtle body is there. So jaladishu iva suryadina. Okay. Suryadinam rupadimatvat parichinnatvat. There is a long debate here of Pratibimbavada and Avachedavada. So Avacheda, those people always argue Suryadinam rupadimatvat, the sun, because it is a form, therefore, and it has color, it has form means it is lighted object and has a round form, and therefore it can get reflected in water. Suryadinam Rupadimatvat Parichinnatvat. Sun is in one place having a particular form and a lighted object. Pratibimbam ghatate. Therefore, reflection of such sun is ghatate, is possible, is tenable. Natu tad viparitayaha devatayaha. But this devata is formless. And devata is also is infinite, aparichinnam. Iti ashankya maya shakte achintyatvat. So maya, because the power of maya is inscrutable. Tadvashat ghatitam api ghatate iti abhipretya. Therefore, what is inexplicable also, or what is not possible also, can be made possible. Iti abhipretya achintya shakti matya iti uktam. Bhashyakara says achintya shakti matya. It is by devata that possesses inscrutable power of maya. For that it is possible. I mean, once you take up a model, all kinds of questions will arise, and therefore all these different explanations will be necessary. But somehow we have to explain how Paramatma, because Tattvamasi says that Jivatma is none other than Paramatma. Which means that Sukhi Dukhi Mudaha, I am happy, unhappy, deluded. The one who says is Paramatma. How can it be? So this is, the whole universe is baffled. The people have not yet come out of this question, How can it be? And that's how Vishishta Advaita and Dvaita and all the other things came, because this is impossible. But Bhashyakara says that Upanishad says Tattvamasi. That's how. So we are not going by logic, we are going by what the Upanishad says. You are Brahman. So that's what it is. Then you find out reason to explain. That's how Maya comes in. We are not interested in Maya. We are interested in Brahman. But then there is no other way of explaining other than inexplicable, inscrutable. But somehow, that's why it is said, Kaschana Sambandha Asti. In some kind of a contact is there, because of which Paramatma thinks that I am Jivatma, the Shiva thinks that I am Jiva, and is suffering. This is the most baffling part of Vedanta, or of life. Why should I say Vedanta? Vedanta explains life. Life is like that. It's not Vedanta is like that. The one who claims himself to be Jiva and says I am happy, unhappy, I am mudha, I am deluded, he is Brahman. When you really examine him, you will discover that he is happy, unhappy, mudha, or they are all superficial. They are no different from the costume of an actor. It is possible that actor may, out of delusion, take himself to be a beggar, and so also Shiva may take himself to be Jiva. So whatever mechanism you prefer, you can assume. The answer must be what? That Jiva is Shiva. That's all. That the one who takes himself to Jiva is Brahman. That is reality. To explain that reality, whatever model suits you, you adopt. You like Pratibimvada? Go ahead. Avachedavada? Okay. Avasavada? Whatever Vada you want, which you think is satisfactory, but then ultimately understanding must be that Jiva is none other than Brahma. That's all. So that is the whole idea here, is being developed that way. Okay. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Shakritau Vande Bhagavantau Ishvaro Gururatmedi मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम्। One rather bad news we have to give you, and that is that we will not have classes from now on. After long discussion with our doctor, we have come to